Dear listener, before the story begins, I ask you to subscribe to my channel. This is the best motivation at the start. And we are starting. Hey everyone. I've been carrying a heavy burden for quite some time now, and it has motivated me to compose this message. Rather than seeking advice, I'm hoping to gather your thoughts and opinions on my predicament and how to proceed. Additionally, I'd like to hear how others might react in a comparable situation. My wife, Emily, has been unfaithful to me on 2 occasions, yet I continue to reside with her. Allow me to explain in chronological order. Emily and I met in college when she was 3 years younger than me, and I had recently completed my military service. We fell deeply in love and decided to cohabitate after 6 months. We rented an apartment and began our relatively humble student life. We lived harmoniously, savoring life's simple joys, and seldom engaged in arguments or conflicts. Subsequently, my parents assisted us in purchasing our first apartment. After approximately 5 years of living together, I finally started earning a respectable income, having also completed my degree. I want to emphasize that throughout those 5 years, I never cheated on or even flirted with anyone else. I felt that my wife deserved better, as everything was perfect on the domestic front. The apartment was always clean, our belongings were organized, and she consistently prepared delicious meals. I had no suspicions of her being unfaithful either, as she never flirted with anyone or behaved inappropriately. However, at work, I began conversing with a couple named Mike and Jessica, who had only been dating for about a month. They were fun and interesting individuals. Coincidentally, I secured a job for my wife at the same company during that time. We started socializing as families, engaging in activities such as joint trips to the countryside, visiting each other's homes, and all the typical things friends do. But one day, Jessica requested that I give her a ride home after work. That's when I discovered she had feelings for me. I must admit that I had previously noticed her attraction towards me, and being a beautiful girl, I was even somewhat flattered by it. However, I didn't make a big deal out of it, as I had chosen a clear life stance, not to cheat on my wife and not to be sidetracked by trivial matters. Simultaneously, my workload increased significantly. I began working Saturdays and Sundays to furnish the apartment, buy clothes for my wife, and so on. My wife started spending more and more time with our couple friends, just the 3 of them without me, going to movies, the park, and having fun at Mike's place. Financial concerns weren't as pressing for Mike, as he came from a well-off family and could afford to work without exerting himself too much. Meanwhile, Jessica asked me to drive her home again. During the ride, she confessed her feelings for me, mentioned that things were over between her and Mike, and that they were on the verge of breaking up. Well, we started kissing, and she did me a favor, so to speak, in the car. After that, I rushed home, consumed by guilt and feeling terrible for betraying my wife. I told the girl to keep quiet, that nothing would happen between us, and it's as if nothing had occurred. From then on, I tried to avoid their company. My wife, of course, continued socializing with them, or so I thought at the time. Jessica quit right after that incident, and I learned from colleagues that she broke up with Mike around the same time. That's when it dawned on me. Who was my wife going to the movies and visiting if they were no longer a couple, and it was just him? Naturally, that evening I inquired about it, to which my wife replied, "Oh yes, that's how it is. But she feels so bad for them as a couple that she's trying her best to help them reconcile, and Mike wants Jessica back. So he asked for her advice, and they talked for a long time." Well, that's when I first realized something suspicious was going on, and my wife was being dishonest. I called Jessica and decided to ask what was really happening. She replied that she broke up with Mike almost immediately after quitting, and they don't communicate at all. Then she said, "But have you considered why he's going to the movies with your wife?" Well, I was torn between a vague sense of guilt, as if I had crossed a line myself, thinking that even if there was some flirting, I kind of redeemed my own betrayal by putting a stop to it. I thought I'd ask my wife to stop socializing with him and leave it at that. But I couldn't have anticipated my wife's reaction to this request. She nearly threw a fit, saying they're friends, they have a great friendship, and she can't do that to him because he's having a difficult time after Jessica dumped him, and the poor guy is suffering. I was in shock. The rose-colored glasses came off. I began to realize that I was either about to be cheated on or was already being cheated on, although I refused to believe it. I decided to find irrefutable evidence, as I didn't want to accuse her and cause a scandal without basis, as if I myself was guilty and indebted to her and to him in some way. I started tracking her and discovered that she had password protected all her social media accounts, although previously I could freely access them and listen to music from her page. I didn't have my own. I caught her in the classic way. I saw their text messages. It was awful, all lovey-dovey, butterflies in the stomach, expressing their desire to be together. The worst part was them discussing how to prevent her from getting pregnant after they last had unprotected sex. Then it got worse. I was incredibly lucky, so to speak. My laptop, which I rarely used, had his page open. He fancied himself a music aficionado, and whenever they'd come over, he'd play music from his page. And in the messages there, he's discussing with his best friend how and where he had sexual relations with my wife. The most awful thing was that once it happened right in our apartment when I drunkenly fell asleep in the other room along with Jessica. They did it in the kitchen. Well, I slapped her, stuffed a bag with her things in her hands, and kicked her out. She didn't really resist and went to stay with a friend. I called Jessica, told her everything, brought her to my place, and couldn't get off her for 2 days. In a way, I felt like I was restoring my self-esteem through that. She immediately brought over her toothbrush and underwear to my apartment. My wife apparently began dating that jerk Mike. Initially, I found the situation somewhat amusing, as if we had switched partners. However, after a couple of weeks, I grew weary of Jessica. Under various pretexts, I managed to get her out of the apartment and started living alone. She was useless around the house anyway, unable to cook or clean, and only skilled at making love. Moreover, I had no feelings for her from the beginning. She was merely beautiful. Simultaneously, my anger towards my wife subsided, and I was overwhelmed by a strong yearning for her. I couldn't sleep at night. After a week, I realized that I couldn't live without her and made the call. We met, talked, and decided to start anew. She immediately supported the idea, but it seemed to me without much enthusiasm. A couple of days later, I collected her belongings from her friend's place, and my wife returned home. However, she was different, like a stranger. When I'd go to bed, she'd still be sitting on social media in the kitchen for an extended period, even though she couldn't have cared less about it before. She always kept her phone with her and didn't show much desire for intimacy. She suddenly developed a multitude of pretensions, such as wanting brand-name clothes and going clubbing. Well, I started following her and realized that her relationship with that jerk Mike was far from over. They were still meeting and talking. Then she suddenly started having a lot of training at her college, along with other shady activities. She also began drinking whiskey and coke alone in the kitchen every evening or some other swill. A bunch of vague girlfriends appeared out of nowhere, whom I was never introduced to. When I'd confront her, she'd dismiss it as nonsense, claiming she only loves me. Her desire to take care of the house also vanished. Finally, I called that jerk Mike and said I know everything, and if I find out anything else, I'll beat him to a pulp. He swore up and down that he'd cease all contact. Well, this whole charade lasted another month and a half. I tried my best to regain my wife's attention through flowers, cafes, and surprises, and finally, one fine moment, she changed. She became like she used to be, loving me, planning our future, and taking care of the house. Of course, I later realized that their relationship had simply reached its logical conclusion. Either he got bored of her, or she of him. But I didn't need to read any text then. It was evident from her behavior. 6 months later, we had our wedding. A year after that, our wonderful son was born. I have no doubts that he's mine, as he looks a lot like me. Life returned completely to normal and started to flourish. I began to earn good money, and my wife and child wanted for nothing. We bought expensive cribs, strollers, and other stuff. We started traveling abroad, and not just to Turkey either. I bought her a car, as it was difficult for her to go grocery shopping with our child and so on. I'd always send my wife, her mom, and our kid to the sea for a month so they wouldn't have to sit in this stuffy city. In short, that's how we lived and developed. We started planning to buy a nice big apartment, as ours was getting too cramped and uncomfortable. 10 years of living together had passed. 5 years since that situation that we recalled only as a life lesson in what to never do again and to value our relationship. I again had a lot of work. I transferred to a different position. I also took up more mature hobbies like fishing, hunting, and motorboats. but no more, no less than others. I was never a homebody, and drinking beer in front of the TV on Saturdays definitely wasn't my thing. Her maternity leave ended, and she asked to go back to work, as sitting at home wasn't her cup of tea either. She's a smart, proactive girl. She got a good job and started working successfully, earning decent money. And then a year of hard work went by, and she started constantly complaining about having too much on her plate and always being tired. And then this girlfriend appeared at her work, Victoria, 10 years older than her with 3 marriages behind her. To top it off, she regularly cheats on her third husband. Knowing this, I didn't approve of this friendship much, but I thought whatever. My wife seems to have learned her lesson. And overall, this girlfriend was always very respectful and kind to me. I spent every evening listening to how smart and awesome this girlfriend is, how much she likes her, and how she's teaching her about life and opening her eyes to many things. After a while, 2 more girlfriends appeared at work, and the moment came when they decided to meet outside of work on Fridays, for like a girls' night. She asked permission, said it would be at one of the 4 girls' houses. They'd drink wine and play board games. Well, okay, I let her go. I have work events sometimes too, and it's even beneficial to socialize with colleagues in an informal setting sometimes. Before and after the first incident, I ruled out any possibility of future cheating. She came back at 4 a.m. drunk and irritably said it's all not for her. She's tired and won't go to something like that again. I scolded her a bit for waking me and our kid, but by morning we forgot about it. I also often stay out late with colleagues on Fridays over beer and snacks. It's a sin not to chat over some drinks, but it still raised a red flag. One thing is coming home at 1 a.m. or even 2 a.m. Another is 4 in the morning. The second warning sign was when I came back from a long business trip, and she didn't meet me at the airport. Before that, she'd always be waiting for me in the kitchen with a tasty dinner, but this time, she didn't even come out. And then it was all textbook. Complete disregard for me, total indifference to our home and child. Our son practically moved in with my mom because she supposedly had too much work and no time to pick him up from daycare. Then the unreal obsession with her appearance, gym, tanning, clothes. Another corporate event, another 4 a.m. return. All the while, endlessly sending me photos of them, sitting with the women playing cards. I started suspecting she had re-established contact with that jerk Mike from 5 years ago. The behavior was too similar. And also that idiotic smile she'd have sometimes in the evenings when coming out of the other room. I later realized she was texting with her lover in those moments. And then once, she left her phone on the bed. I open it, and there's a text. "Good morning, honey," from some guy. I call her over, ask what the hell. She makes an excuse that, oh, there's this one guy on their team at work. She had said before the team was all women. He's texting because he's waiting on some report. Well, okay. Then I send her to Sochi with her mom and our kid for 3 weeks. She didn't call me at all from there. When I'd call in the evenings, she was often busy or couldn't talk to me. She only complained about how awful it was vacationing with my mom, and how she was preventing her from relaxing. In general, she was displeased. Oh well. Then we finally bought our dream home, a huge 3-bedroom in an elite building, and slowly started renovating. It was right in the midst of this process when we were at the apartment that her BFF Victoria came over. She went out to talk in the car but forgot her phone. Well, I snooped again, and lo and behold, there's a message from her to this work colleague. "Good night." I put the phone back and waited till evening. And there it was. Like clockwork. That message was gone, deleted. It was all clear. I gathered my belongings and departed. I can't engage in conflicts in the presence of our child. That evening, I called her and stated that I am aware of everything. In response, she concocted a tale about having no involvement, claiming that this colleague is harassing her with messages, and she refrained from informing me to avoid causing a scene at work. But it's not the first occurrence. Having witnessed her conduct, I commenced an investigation. Her second version was that, okay, there was some flirtation, but that's commonplace, and everyone engages in it. I applied pressure, mentioning that I had managed to read a message about intimacy earlier. Following a prolonged silence, a terse reply arrived. "I apologize. I'm an idiot." And that's when I lost my composure. It felt like being struck on the back with a sledgehammer. So, she had been intimately involved in carrying on an affair with this work colleague for approximately 6 months, while I toiled like a galley slave and carried out the renovation. I got intoxicated, vandalized the colleague's apartment with my companions, and punched him in the face a couple of times. It turns out that all the corporate events took place at his apartment, not some girlfriend's. He claimed that he's not entirely at fault, as she pursued him, and would visit under various pretexts. Well, and then he's like, why decline if she's all over him? In general, I created a mess of things, relocated to an apartment, found a new partner. But the story repeated itself. I still returned home. My wife sobbed over the phone, pleading for forgiveness. Our son cried too. The justifications were the usual. I didn't love her enough, didn't value her, etc. But for a year and a half now, I can't perceive her as anything but a harlot. I feel terrible for our son. I myself was raised in a single-parent household, and I know it's nothing good. And I don't want to divide assets with her, but I still intend to end it once our child is a bit older. I'm periodically haunted by the question that I only know about 2 affairs, but could there have been other dalliances too? What are your thoughts?